Today we are starting Unit 2, Notes number 3. Today I am out, so I want to make sure that you guys stay on task. You need to watch videos number 3 and video number 4. So make sure you monitor your time, you're taking down your notes, writing 3 most important facts per slide. And if you need to wait and do your summary later, I prefer for you to watch your videos in class and then go back and do your summary. Today we're going to be looking at city life and how cities began to change during the industrial era. First, we're going to look at the concept of a melting pot. So in America, during this time of industrialization, we began to see high levels of immigration. And so as we're getting people coming to America from other countries, it creates what's referred to as a melting pot. The definition is a mixture of people of different cultures and races. The beauty of American society is the diversity of its cultural contributions. We have immigrants coming in from Europe, from Latin America, from Asian countries, Pacific Islander, from Arab countries, and so all of these people come to our country, and they all, share their culture. So it helps to define America. And so this period we're referring to is from about 1870 to 1920, and it marks the greatest period of immigration in American history. So now let's check out some more information, specific information on immigrants. So first, European immigrants. So about 20 million European immigrants came to the U.S. between 1870 and 1920. And so we see a difference between what's referred to as old immigrants. So the old immigrants were the first wave of immigrants versus new immigrants who are coming in now, closer to turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s. So old immigrants would be kind of the early colonialists, first settlers to our country. Most of those immigrants were coming primarily from Western and Northern Europe, countries like England, Ireland, Scotland, Germany, and France. Some of these countries, they came already speaking English, and the majority of them were of Protestant faith. So again, not all, but majority. And so we began to see also similar characteristics. We think about English, Irish, French, German. They tend to have lighter skin tones, fairer hair, and so they kind of create this image. Then versus the new immigrants coming from around the later 1800s, early 1900s, began coming from Eastern and Southern Europe. So you get a different mix of countries. Countries like Russia, Italy, Greece. Most of these immigrants did not speak English, so it's another hurdle for them to have to overcome when they move to a new country, having to adjust. They also had a more diverse religious background. They have higher numbers of Catholic immigrants, Jewish immigrants, and so when you think about immigrants or people from Russia, Italy, Greece, and that area, they tend to have different features. More olive skin tone, darker hair, darker eyes. But a lot of their reasons for coming are very similar. They were escaping religious persecution. They're hoping to start a new life. They want a better life for their family. And it's all in the spirit of kind of like leaving reform and revolt from their countries. So let's look at these pictures. These are some pictures of some of these early immigrants coming into our country. You want to look at the people. What are some things that you might notice? Definitely look at the type of luggage that they have and the fact that it's not really luggage. So a lot of the people coming are not very wealthy, don't have a lot of money. You're also seeing lots of families, lots of women, lots of children coming into our country at this time. Asian immigrants. So in 1848, Asians, particularly from China and Japan, came in large numbers. So Asian immigrants would enter the country through Angel Island on the west coast. So Angel Island is off the coast of San Francisco. They came seeking fortune in the California gold rush. They were looking to work on the railroads, hoping to make money. and send money back to their families. So you tend to see more Asian men coming over, sending money back, and then eventually bringing their families over to work or to live with them. So reasons for coming, of course, wages and work. Um, Asian immigrants get hired because they're willing to work for less money. And they would send their salary back home to China or Japan, where it would be worth more to their families. So by 1920, over 200,000 Asian immigrants were living on the West Coast. So Ellis Island. Ellis Island was the port that European immigrants would come through. It's off of New York City. So immigration station and checkpoint in New York on the East Coast, and it's the arrival point for Europeans. Through this process, they go through a health inspection, they have to register their name, and they also make sure that they're not carrying any diseases. So sometimes immigrants get quarantined if that's the case. They also have to prove that they can come into the country and support themselves. They have to have at least a minimum amount of money, pass a basic literacy test, and have paperwork to show that they're in good standing, that there aren't, criminal fleeing from anything in their own home country. So here are some more pictures showing immigrants going through the checkpoints at Ellis Island. Once the ships would dock, the people would come out, go in the line, they'd be inspected, they'd have to register themselves. So it was a large process. So lastly, we're going to look at problems for new immigrants. So a big thing they would have to deal with would be surviving culture shock, because living in America would be vastly different than their home countries. Many times, New York City or the big cities that they were living in had a lot more technological advancements than what they were used to. The sheer number of people was very large. And so you have a lot of people having panic and confusion from living in a strange society with new customs and beliefs. So it would take people a while to get adjusted. Occasionally, Americans would take advantage of immigrants in the sense that immigrants wouldn't know better, who was trying to help them, who was trying to take from them. Immigrants often paid higher rent, paid inflated prices, were more susceptible to thieves and robbery. Most immigrants tended to look for ethnic communities that they could live in. So whenever you look at big cities like New York and Boston, Chicago, you have neighborhoods that are primarily dedicated to specific ethnic groups. You may have an Italian neighborhood, a Russian neighborhood, a Jewish neighborhood. And it wasn't that the city forced people to live there. It's just that a group of people might settle, and then other people would learn, like, oh, this place has Italian markets. It has, a Catholic church in the neighborhood. And so people would move themselves to these areas to be surrounded with people that had their similar culture, their similar background. They could help each other out. So in order to survive, you began to see immigrants kind of locating themselves in these ethnic communities. So urban opportunities for immigrants. Most immigrants, when they did come to the U.S., they did tend to locate themselves in large cities, primarily because you had more availability of jobs. So this is where factories were at. They needed people to work. So if they wanted to find jobs quickly, their best bet was to move to big cities like New York, Chicago, Boston, anywhere where they can find a job. They needed to support themselves, and that was their main objective. So industrialization and factories created millions of low-skilled jobs. Very little training was needed in order to start work. Uneducated poor could easily find work. Also, in big cities, you had a vast availability of cheap housing. So as cities grew, apartments and tenements were a type of apartment. They tended to be more maybe run down, were built to accommodate citizens. So this is where rent was cheap, rooms were abundant, but the living space was cramped. So if you're looking at the bottom picture, you have, families upon families, living in all these cramped areas. In some cases, because it was hard for people to afford to live in certain areas, you'd have families numbering, 9, 10, 11, 12 people living in one-room apartments. And this is also in a time before running water, indoor plumbing. So you can just imagine the amount of trash and waste that would be in these neighborhoods. So it wasn't always the most ideal living situation. So overcoming nativism. So nativism, the definition is anti-immigrant sentiment and favoritism towards native-born white Americans. So the whole idea of nativism is people that support and only want the best for native-born white Americans. Not Native Americans, white Americans. And so they didn't like new immigrants coming into our country, bringing their culture. They felt that immigrants created competition for jobs. They felt that they brought neighborhoods down, that they were all criminals, and just didn't want to welcome them. So most immigrants try to assimilate, try to blend into American culture, learn the language, maybe change their style of dress. Those that didn't assimilate often faced the wrath and prejudice from nativists. So nativists generally hated and targeted Southern European immigrants the most. Oh, sorry, Southern and Eastern Europeans and Asian immigrants the most, primarily because they looked so different and contrary to old immigrants. So old immigrants were more, blonde-haired, blue eyes, where now you had these newer immigrants that had darker hair, darker features, and didn't fit with the old mold. And so we see a lot of these tendencies, this idea of nativism, still existing today. People will blame immigrants for certain things, not having jobs, crime in city, where it might not always be the fault of immigrants. So this is the end of the notes for today. So remember, you want to make sure you've done your 3 facts. You've also are going to finish your summary and that you've highlighted any key terms that we covered in the notes today. Thank you.